Hello, and now we are live with our, what is it, the third or the fourth .NET Community Stand-Up for Language and Runtime?
I don't know.
Something like this. You want to introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Philip Carter. I work on F#, the .NET project integration tooling, and I do a little bit of stuff with C# as well.
I'm Emil Landgraf. I'm a program manager on the same team, more or less, but I focus on the class library side of the house.
And I'm Kathleen Dollard, also on the .NET Core team, and I work with, I'm the PM for Visual Basic. I work on C#, and I also work with the .NET SDK and CLI, which is most of what I think I'll be talking about today.
Awesome. So I really hope that we are live. Actually, let me double check this. It seems like a good thing to.
We're working on this, folks. We're really happy to be here with you, and we really hope we are actually here with you. That would be awesome. Okay.
You got YouTube up.
Is somebody watching the comments?
Load up some Steve Brule or Eric Andre videos.
So apparently we are live. That's good. I feel much better now.
Are we looking at comments?
Actually, that's a good point, Kathleen. You are on
the comments might be telling us. I'd love it if there was somebody out there listening who could tell us, hey, we want to see your comments.
So in case the people are watching right now and thinking we're doing this for the first time, that's not completely wrong because we changed our setup quite a bit.
Yeah.
It's kind of confusing. There's this button that like you really want to press because it's the only one that's lit up, and apparently it's the one that ends the stream. But it's right next to a button that says end stream, and they both do the same thing.
You know, but I think that people would probably rather us not just look like clowns and actually get it together to actually like talk about stuff we want to talk about today, because we got a bunch of stuff.
We do.
I suppose. I don't know. The looking at clowns thing for a little bit, I think it brings out the human side. You know, we're goofballs.
We're not robots, that's for sure. So that definitely not robots.
So before we go to our stuff, like I really have a hard time not to geek. I have to geek out for a moment.
We have to share.
I think that I think I just pressed the button. So the thing is, so I don't know whether you saw this, but they did this picture of the black hole, right? Which is, if you think about it, doesn't sound super amazing on the first sight because like you just point something at the sky, you press a button, a picture comes out. But that's not quite what they have done, right? They had to like collect data from a bunch of stuff. It's like petabytes worth of disk drives full of data, and it took them like 3 years to actually get to the point where you can see the picture. And I find that fascinating as a computer guy. So much data that the fastest way to get it from Hawaii to where they were working on it, which I think was, I don't know, I think it's Boston or somewhere. The fastest way to get it there was an airplane. Yeah.
Yeah, it's well, and it was they talked about you can find it. I think not in this one, but there's like a CNN article where they actually linked to the papers that they submitted. They submitted, I think it was 6 individual papers. They're intense. I tried to read them, and they're kind of like I don't understand like 3 paragraphs, and then I understand a little bit 3 paragraphs. But like they assembled everything to the point where they actually effectively had this image back in 2017, but it took them. Or sorry, 2016, I think, or 20, I don't know. Basically, it took them like almost 3 years to actually have with a degree of mathematical certainty that that's what it actually looks like. Yeah. Because they had to spend that long developing, like, you know, okay, this is what our tolerance is. This is, you know, okay, how do we define a mathematical function that defines what our bias is for the things that we're trying to generate out of this thing, and then how do we make sure that we're not biasing and that took a really long time, and it was extremely rigorous, which is pretty awesome.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So I think we should just skip over all the jokes about where my socks went and all those other black hole jokes, and just see what Emo's setting up to show us here. And
why don't you start talking about what the students talking about, because I think we haven't tweeted yet that we are live. So let me just fix this first.
Oh yeah, well let's do that. Let's let people know. Oh, the comments are
not showing up for us, but that's
we can't see the comments.
Or are
they? They should show up in this little app on the right hand side. But
hey, this, like I said, the system's new. Hey, I can talk about something just while you guys are getting organized. How's that sound? Because I don't have any. I couldn't quite get my act together to get this pushed this morning, but it's going to show up on .NET Designs hopefully today or tomorrow. We might skip to announcements on this one because we're not really gonna. I don't think we're gonna take input unless somebody really screams that it's a problem. So .NET Build, which is at the command line, CLI, you type dotnet space build. And it's a very common way for people to build their applications. Everything's cool. it was doing something a little unexpected, and we're fixing that. So it was so .NET Build calls MSBuild, and when it does that, it adds a couple of switches. And to be honest, I've forgotten the other one, but it makes sense, and we're leaving it. But it passed T:\build, and what that did is it said, hey, you need to run a target named build. Well, there's a couple of scenarios where that's not really what you wanted to do. One of them, and the most important, is if you had a default target in your project file, it actually didn't run. And so you weren't running the target that you wanted. And in this unusual case, it was somewhat unusual case. And then the other situation where it wasn't quite doing what you wanted was if you had your own target that you added to .NET Build. So maybe you said .NET Build T:\clean, which may not be the most common way to clean, but it should have worked. And instead of working, it wound up just running build first. And so it would do your build, and then it would do clean, and that is really a nonsensical thing to do. So at any rate, we're taking that off, and because the default, if you don't have anything else specified, it will run build. And so your behavior will be exactly the same in every case that we can think of. There's a couple of super side cases that this might affect, but we don't expect it to affect anything. So at any rate, the case that will affect is if you were counting on running build, you were saying .NET Build T:\something, and you were counting on build also running, which would be sort of unusual because if you're that much into the switches, you're probably using MSBuild. So we're taking T:\build off of the .NET Build. And that's just this little thing we're doing that I don't actually have anything I can put up on screen right now. Do you have your act together yet?
I think I do. Actually,
it's fantastic. Okay. So, because I've got some stuff that I want to share that we actually can get links to.
Yep.
And then you've got some stuff to share, and we've just got boatloads of stuff today. So
yes.
I feel like we kind of been like gnawed with the program so far.
You're holding
we
back.
Still aren't seeing any comments, but
no,
we think there are some. Do we have a broken comment situation?
I think the problem is that they don't show up in our app, but they do show up on the YouTube. So
you can see them.
I can see them. So far, people just confirm that we are live, so that's good.
That what?
That we are live.
That's good.
Great, we're alive. We're alive. Wonderful. Okay, that's fantastic.
So in that sense, yeah. How do you want to go next? Do you want to talk about the SDK versioning?
Yeah. Can you bring up that a copy of the document? We're working on getting this into docs because it is quite confusing, and I'll try to stay light on it, which is specifically what we're going to put, what we've proposed to put into Microsoft Docs explains why this happens. But right now I want to focus on what happens and how this will affect some of you. With confidence, I can say it will affect some of you. So MSBuild ties a SDK version to a Visual Studio version. Exactly why, it's going to be explained. Somebody can reach out on Twitter. I can explain it. It's real. We're working on changing that in the long term. But in the short term, what this means is that 2.2.100, the 2.2.1NN, so 105 is what I think we've got up right now, but 2.2.1NN. is required for Visual Studio 2017 to do 2.2 development. You can't use 2.2.200, which is the thing that you're likely to get if you just reach out to our current downloads page, because it doesn't really say, yeah, this isn't going to work with 2017. So you get a rather bizarre situation where your templates will work, but then you won't be able to work with the project that you create. And so it's the if you can scroll up to the top quickly, the message that you get is in this. I think it's right at near the top. If you can look for where we're listing messages, we have two right there. I think you just went past it. So this is the kind of message that you're going to get if you run into this problem. So you just need to download 2.2.1 and whatever the most recent patch is for 2017 development, and you need 2.2.2NN for 2019 development. And so you want both of the machines if you're working in both and doing 2.2 development. We're working on it.
So Adam is asking where this page will be, but it will be probably published under .NET Designs.
We'll have a link to it. If you go to how is the SDK versioned, how's the .NET Core SDK version, there is a page right now on that in help. We will link from there, but we're not quite sure a lot of things about where it goes because I'm used to contributing to the .NET Core help, and this is likely to be in the Visual Studio help because it is in fact a Visual Studio where you encounter the problem. So I know less about how that's organized, so I really can't comment on exactly where it's going to be. And there's one other small way you can run into this, which is just a surprise. We have sort of left SDKs on your machine, and you may sometimes like to clean them up. And if you remove .NET Core 2.1.500.5NN, you remove that, then your Visual Studio 2017 will no longer work for 2.1 apps. It needs 2.1.5 NN, and 2019 needs 2.1.6 NN. And yes, I'm sorry. We are working on this. I can explain how we got here, and it was logical, small steps. And I'm actually going to I have an upcoming talk, which is what do you do with 30 years of mistakes? And I've actually decided a big part of that talk is the last year and a half and the just how hard it is to get this SDK versioning so it works in all cases. But in this case, we think we have some plans. I think we're going, but I just don't know if we can land them in the next period of time during the 2.1, 2.2 time frame. It's just stuff I don't know if we can land in patches. So that's the mess. Do we have any comments on that? Anybody saying, are you kidding me? Because I've been getting that on Twitter a lot.
Yes.
Yeah, it's been loud. It's been loud on Twitter, yeah. Okay, so how do you update your knowledge and framework versions? So one of the places you can go on that is help. And if you have trouble with this article, let me know, because we worked on this 6 months ago, maybe a little longer, to get the how our .NET, I think it's called how our .NET Core how is .NET Core versioned or close to that in help. If you have trouble finding it, we'll get it in the page here, but I think it's pretty straightforward. You're getting the same error with .NET Core 3 and Visual Studio 2019. First question I've got for, and my eyes aren't brilliant. I have trouble reading that. Is it looks like Valdebahat. Is that Yaldabahat? Okay. Can you make sure you have .NET Core 3 preview installed? Because we do not install .NET Core 3.0 preview with Visual Studio 2019 release. We're not in the habit of putting previews onto full release. So if you could check that out, my guess is that's your problem. If not, can you put something on, you can go ahead and use the .NET Core SDK. So it's github/.net/SDK, and you can put an issue there. What factors about 2019? Well, 2019 is not causing any of the issues that I just talked about. So if you just do an install of 2019, you should be good, and it is a sweet version. It's faster. It's got some really good stuff going on in test. You can check out the release notes to see what's there, and you can run it side by side. So it should be a very safe install for you to put that on and then jump back to Visual Studio 2017 where you need to.
Yeah, in fact, I mean, everybody on our
team yeah, can you go back to the version matches? We scrolled off of that to show the message, and I forgot to ask you to scroll back. Sorry. We have a table, and we're looking at the location that this table will reside, but it will be linked from as many places as we can find it, because this is the key information to get what you need. Yaldabahat, I don't know what's going on there, and I don't have enough information from these comments to get that, so I'm going to ask that you reach out, if possible. Our preferred place would be GitHub, and then some of the super smart people. I work with the most amazing engineers, and one of them will take a look at it and see if we can figure out what's going on.
Yeah, I think like people often ask like, can they install 2019 safely? And like I think the entire team on our side is dogfooding at least multiple versions of VS. Most people on the team even have multiple versions of the same branch, meaning like you have 2019 in multiple versions, like the master branch versus their preview branch, their preview branches, and it works pretty well. Like VS was designed like I think 2 to 3 years ago, where they moved to like basically multi-installs side by side, and I've seen pretty close to 0 issues. And if that version doesn't work for you, just go to the other version. And
I want to get this next comment, which is about the macOS 2.2.203 SDK. We're working on that. I talked to Lee yesterday about that, and I expect it will be up soon, because I think we can work with the concern that we had. If not, there'll be an announcement on that, but I believe it should be up quite soon. We just need to make sure that it goes smoothly with Visual Studio for Mac, and we were just checking that out, and so I think we'll be up with that quite soon.
Yeah, so Lydon is asking whether .NET 4 and all applications are based on .NET 4. What is the best option to upgrade to without breaking the current applications or need to migrate? That's more like a question for the framework itself. Like, it's not really related to VS necessarily.
So are you looking at installing, I'm sorry, on the production server upgrade, are you looking at upgrading your framework, or are you looking at upgrading Visual Studio? So .NET 4 is fairly old, so you might mean either one.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I would say is if you go from 4.0, don't go to 4.5.
No.
Go to 4.6 or 4.7 at least, because we made a bunch of fixes post 4.5 that make that one more compatible with 4.0, because between 4.0 and 4.5 there were a bunch of breaking changes that were unintentional that we addressed later on. So if you have to upgrade from 4.0, I would honestly say if all things being equal, you might as well just move to 4.8. If that's not an option for you, go to 4.7.2 at least, because that has a really great support story for .NET Standard projects. And yeah, 4.5 I would just skip entirely. What we do have is like there's in MSDN, when you search for framework versions, we actually do list the breaking changes. So there's actually a document that tells you what changes we have done. And you can actually run API port over your code as well, and it will actually point you to APIs that you are using that might cause problems on the later version of the framework. And they actually link the knowledge base articles directly from that.
How can they find API port? Because if somebody's not looking at the migration, they may not be thinking about the API port tool. That might not be on their radar.
So the way you find API port is you just do this, and then the first hit is basically.
Can you control plus on that? Like I said, it's like old eyes here. Yeah, thanks.
The one thing is, let me actually. So it's under. I never find this releases, and this is where you get the. API port zip file, which is a command line tool, and that's what you can run over your code base, and it gives you a report back.
Right. So we think about this a lot in relation to migration to .NET Core, but it also works across earlier framework versions. So it's our go-to tool for all things compatibility.
Might be wrong, but I think that is the one. Yeah, there was a document somewhere. I cannot find it right now because we moved it a few times, but I can link to it as well. Like literally, there's a page for every .NET for a framework version that we ship that lists the breaking changes that we have done, or impactful changes we have done. Not all are breaking, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be my recommendation to go about that.
So we're talking about.
So if I install 4.8 or 4.7, it will not break the current production. That's the intention. So what's important is like any 4x release is in place, right? So that means if you install 4.8 on the box that has 4.0 on it, afterwards you only have 4.8 on the box, right? So 4.8 replaces any framework version in 4x replaces any other framework version in 4x, right? So like there's no side by side. So if you want to run a 4.0 app, you probably want to be on a 4.0 machine. Otherwise you basically say, yeah, I want to migrate my app from 4.0 to 4.8, and then you should test that and then check that it still continues to work. The intention is that it continues to work because we take compat really seriously, so we do a lot of testing on that. But if you in place update a framework underneath an application, things can go wrong, right? So that's why we built .NET Core, because it was getting to the point where it was hard for us to actually innovate in the framework.
Yeah, and just to clarify that, because it's a production server, right? So I want to be like make sure we haven't forgotten this, which is that if you put a new version into the GAC on your production server, that's the one that's going to run. So do your testing prior to going to your production server, so you make sure that you're doing that. You may not have changed anything in your app yet, but you just want to make sure that goes smooth for you. Okay, so I have one more thing on versions. Do you want to just cover that really quick? Can you go to Github.net announcements, please, and look at 102? Because this happened. I don't think we missed last month because we were like right on top of the launch and all, and so we just said, well, you know, we'll skip this month. So we didn't do March, and going back to February, this came out. This was announced after February. 102.
Oh, 102.
102. Not that one. That one. All right. So I mentioned earlier that we've been leaving SDKs on your machine. We are going to improve that. We're not going to maybe take that as far as some people want, but we need to stay in the right level of conservative decision here. So what's going to happen is patches will now override each other by default. So if you use the installer, and this right now is on Windows, assuming it goes well there, we'll move it to Mac. So the SDK installer on Windows will now install over patches. So if you have 2.1.500 on your machine right now, and you install 2.1.505, which is the latest that you can download, then 500 will go away. So it'll overwrite that. We've also done some work in Visual Studio, so it leaves less behind, and we are definitely moving towards doing a better job keeping your machine clean. In the meantime, there is actually a help for removing old .NET Core runtimes and SDKs from your machine, and it'll walk you through finding out what you've got and how you can install it. And yes, it can be tedious, and we are trying to make that better going forward, but it is only within the feature band, which is the 100 series, that we're going to be overriding. And the reason for that is that there's various reasons you may need different feature bands, one of which I just talked about, which is Visual Studio. So we're not going to be overriding feature bands, but within feature bands, we're going to start overriding patches. And I just want to call that out while we were, like, maybe we see if nobody has questions, maybe we can leave versions for a while.
Yeah, so basically what you're saying is like the third digit is basically replaced normally, and then the second one and the major one are basically left alone, right? Is that fair?
Well, I try not to use major, minor kind of numbers here. I try to say first position, second position, third position, and then third position. There's the hundreds and then the patch. So that's why you'll hear me say 3NN, which might be, or let's say 5NN, which might be 501, 502, 503, 504. Those are just patches. And one of the things is that the way the SDK is designed, those actually are not changes to the SDK in almost all cases. Those are actually changes to the runtime, and because the SDK carries the runtime, we have to update it. And so that's also a marker that there is a new runtime available that you might want to look at putting on your production machine as well, because those are patches.
So what is this 504 and 600 and 601, 602? Those are patches, right?
Right. So 500 would be the 2.1 versions that work with Visual Studio 2017. You can, of course, also use them from the command line. But if you do command line and Visual Studio code development, you might want to be on the latest, which is 2.2.200, because all versions of the SDK on the command line work with everything previous. So there's backwards compatibility. The problem with Visual Studio is that the way that it works, we would have to have forward compatibility, which we don't have, in order to not have this problem. And we are looking at ways to make that better, as I said. But if you're just command line, the latest should be good. But if you're on something where you feel like you need to know what feature band you're on, and then as much as possible patch, because we do include things we think are important in patches. That should be things that could crash and things that are security issues, and occasionally something else, but that's pretty much where we're at, and give you the best NuGet, the best Roslyn, the best version of F#, and give you the best. The best. We work on the best. That's what we try for. Yeah.
Sounds good. So, are you done with versioning then?
Unless there's questions, I think we can be done with versioning. Everybody online is probably going, yes, be done with versioning. Do something that is like real. It's like exciting. Maybe we should just like,
Yeah, we should talk
about F# or something. I mean, let's do something fun. C# and VB are also fun.
Nice pun.
I have an order in which I'm going. Saving the most important part.
Oh, okay. Philip is organized. Unlike me.
I'm horribly unorganized.
So what do you want to talk about?
Okay.
3 things.
You want me to give you the suite?
Sure.
$5.
No. No. That's not enough. I'm sorry.
That's not enough money? Okay.
Like maybe if I was in college I would have gone for that, but I haven't been in college
Sounds good.
Yeah, so there's a few things I want to talk about. So first of all, this is F# on the screen, but that's actually unrelated to what I'm talking about right now.
Can you zoom in because I'm an old person?
Zoom in more. Okay.
Keep in mind, you're sitting with old people in this room. Like I can't read things that far away.
I mean, our industry is ageist, so I'm not going to say anything.
We are ageless. We are so ageless.
Oh, ageist is our industry.
I said ageless.
Ageless. There we go. That's better.
We are ageless.
So anyways, so there's a few things. So first, I actually want to talk about C# and C# 8. So there perhaps is a little bit of confusion. We tried to be clear.
Are you going to talk about versions again?
Yeah. I mean, that's how we do it at Microsoft.
No, do not hang up. We will get off versions, but
it's version numbers in colors.
So in talking with some people online, some people were kind of confused about how C# 8 did not release with Visual Studio 2019, and I want to make it clear, C# 8 is not released with Visual Studio 2019. Nor
is Visual Basic 16,
yes.
which will be coming. It also is not in preview yet.
Yes.
C# 8 is in preview.
F# 4.6 released with Visual Studio 2019. So if you're an F# developer, you get a new language, which is great. But no, C# 8 is not released with Visual Studio 2019. There is a preview that is in the box that you can use. And the way that you access that is through .NET Core 3.0 preview. And the reason for that is because there's basically like half the features at this point depend on types that are in .NET Core 3.0. And so it's just simpler for everybody if you just use it in the context of .NET Core 3.0.
But is the .NET Core 3.0 preview in the box? I thought it wasn't. So
it is not, no.
Okay.
So the compiler that can understand stuff is in Visual Studio. But if you have to use .NET Core 3.0 for a good experience, otherwise, like, it's a preview of a language using stuff against things that like it wasn't really built with, and it ends up being really confusing. And so the way that you actually access .NET Core 3.0 preview is you go and download it, and then to use it inside of Visual Studio 2019 GA, you have to go to Tools.
That's General Availability
Options,
or Release.
And then you go to the .NET Core section under Projects and Solutions. So this is kind of, I wish I could blow up my screen a little bit, but you go under .NET Core and there's a checkbox called Use Previews of the .NET Core SDK. And when you do that, then if you have .NET Core 3.0 installed on your machine, everything will all just light up perfectly. If you don't have this checked, then it's going to be kind of confusing. Stuff is not really going to compile. It's not going to recognize the .NET Core 3.0 stuff. Some C# 8 stuff is not going to get recognized and things like that. So you have to make sure that you have this checked. If you're using Visual Studio 2019 16.1 Preview 1, basically Visual Studio 2019 Preview, this checkbox is always checked. So the simplest way actually is if you install the Visual Studio 2019 Preview, then this is always checked. You can then download .NET Core 3 Preview, and then you get C# 8 just in its entirety, all on, all working, kind of no questions asked.
So previews do previews, and release doesn't do previews.
And so we have the ability to use preview stuff inside of the release if, like, you're not really interested in downloading and installing the preview for some reason or another, but you want to access a small bit of that preview functionality. You have to do a bit of additional work, which is why you have to check this checkbox. So that's kind of, I just wanted to offer a little bit of clarity on the C# 8 side of things, because I'd seen sort of a lot of people confused online about if it was shipping, if it was released, when it was shipping, which is, it ships with .NET Core 3.0, so that's going to be later this year.
Yeah, and just downloading .NET Core 3.0 was not enough to let you target it. You do also have to check that checkbox. And so it's in kind of an odd location. It is. Is it going to move?
It will be moving. There's a preview, actually, forget where it is. Yeah, okay, so under Environment, there's this new Preview Features tab, and we're going to have the checkbox appear here. We actually just submitted the pull request for that
Windows Plus
today. Windows Plus.
He's in Parallels. It may not work well. Oh, it did. All right.
Magnifier, yeah.
All right.
No, so we actually have a chance.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah,
so this is where it's going to be pretty soon. So if you want to use C# 8 with .NET Core 3.0 today, you go under Projects and Solutions, .NET Core, there's a checkbox. Starting with the 16.1 updates, you go under Preview Features here. It'll be there. And you can also just search for it, right? If you search for preview, you get stuff, right? You'll see preview features there. You'll be able to use it. So That's sort of that's the story for C#8. That's.
Now are we done with versions?
No.
Oh.
Actually, I'm kidding. We are. So
Emo has not had anything on versions. He's just like, yeah.
He's just laughing internally.
Hold my beer.
Yeah. So I do want to talk about some other stuff before F#. As I said, I also work on .NET project integration tooling. And so a few things that are new here in VS 2019 is we're making project files first class, because project files are files. We don't want to really hide the fact that they're files and that you should be able to edit them.
Hold on. You just said project files are files.
I know, right?
That means I have to read them?
Yeah.
That means I have to review changes to them when I check in?
Uh-huh.
Oh my god.
Yeah, and in the old style projects, they were these gargantuan, horrible...
black holes?
Giant black holes, like these huge messes of XML.
I just want to point out that there is no requirement that you actually review any files.
That's true. I mean, you could be irresponsible.
Right,
as a
like
developer.
that's why you just push to production on Friday and say, so long.
No.
So they're first class files. So what does that actually mean? Well, it means a few things. So first of all, if you're
Can you do
using
that Control
.NET,
Plus thing again?
Sorry?
Can you do that Control Plus
Windows
thing
Plus.
again?
Give
Windows
it a try.
Plus.
I mean, this is going to be real messy, but I'll
All
give it a shot. So you can now, you double click and it'll open up the project file, right?
This is
I can go somewhere else. I can open up this file and I can single click and it'll open it up in the preview tab.
No way. This is
right? So you
awesome.
saw it in the preview tab rather than open it itself, right? But there's more than just opening the file. So I can search right there. It shows up in Control-T results. And I can also Control-Shift-F. I'm going to go look for the SDK attribute somewhere there. And that's going to show up in the Find Window results. Sorry, Find Results window. So this was something that you used to be able to never do. Like basically, especially for people who modify their builds all the time and they do a lot of stuff. It was kind of on them to have a completely untooled experience. They would have to unload the project files. They would have to edit them, and like it was basically like we were trying to hide the fact that project files were files. One of the big efforts with .NET Core was to reduce the size of these things, because it's like, okay, well, pretty much every other ecosystem has you modify files for configuration, whereas we were still kind of stuck in this world of, oh, we don't want you to think about the files. We want you to use these GUI tools that like hide the stuff from you. And for most people, well, I shouldn't say most, but for a lot of people, it was actually just easier to modify the files anyways. Right. So in this case, this is actually a fairly complicated F# project, but there's not a whole lot there really. And that's because there doesn't need to be a whole lot there.
So does that work, excuse me, does that work with .NET Framework apps, project files, or just with .NET Core project files?
Just with .NET Core project files.
All right.
So if you have an existing code base that has, you know, the old style project files and stuff, you're not going to have that. It's going to be all the old behavior. You're still going to have to right click, unload the project, and then edit sort of stuff.
All right. Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, we're not backporting that to the older stuff, because that's like a very significant change that could actually perhaps break.
Yeah, that would be very dangerous. That's what I just wanted to point that out for folks, is that there's a lot more behind that than it like seems on the surface. And so as you're, you know, that's why that's probably not going to happen. Down level.
So that's also one of the reasons why, like, you know, that it's an entirely new system under the covers when you're using the .NET SDK, and it's much easier to modify, and we don't like have this insane risk of breaking people all the time. Whereas the older system, whenever we want to make an improvement, there's a huge risk of breaking, and we've done that before in the past, and it's like we get kind of like let's not break people. They don't want to be broken. They just want their stuff to keep
number
running.
one. So things have to keep working.
Yes. And so finally, I want to talk about F# a little bit, and this was an F# project. This also everything that I showed you.
Can we catch up for comments really quick? Because there's one comment down there I want to make sure we get, which is this is the .NET Core Community Stand-Up, which is all things, random things that's going on in .NET Core languages and Runtime and SDK. And then I don't know if we have anything above that has scrolled off. So do you have a way to check that, Emo? Rather than versions, it could be naming. Well, we could talk about that too. then is there anything else we missed?
No, that's basically all.
Okay.
Okay, good. Okay.
But I do like the suggestion of C #Professional Business Developer Edition 2019.
It's pretty great.
That would be a good name.
So so as I mentioned, the one language that did get a new version was F#. It's F# 4.6. The main thing there is we have a new feature called anonymous record types, right? So anonymous records are fairly straightforward. Right, so it's basically, you got these little bracket thingies here. Where did is this thing actually not up to date? It might not be. I haven't updated my machine on Parallels, but so.
So you're not gonna be able to show us the feature, right? That's what you're saying.
It's one feature. You could actually, you could just look at the blog post actually that announces it.
Okay.
So.
And the blog post is on the .NET blog, or is it on a different blog?
It's on the .NET blog.
Okay.
But yeah, we have a new version of the language. The number of features isn't really big, but the number of changes in the compiler is a lot. We did a tremendous amount of performance work in the compiler, especially when you have a long-lived process. And so especially if you have larger solutions, one of the big things is, one of the big problems is people with really large solutions over time, say over the course of an entire day, their memory usage would get really, really high and they might have to restart, which is do a lot. That is something that should happen significantly less as a result of some of this work. So F# 4.6 it's less about a whole bunch of features so much it is a whole bunch of infrastructure under the covers to just make the stuff that you do from a day-to-day basis a lot easier.
Yeah, and I'm hearing, I haven't run any tests myself, but I'm seeing comments on Twitter that 2019 overall got some really nice performance gains for folks. And so gains as in improvements, not gains as in larger numbers. But so if you haven't tried out 2019, Visual Studio 2019, you might want to put it on your machine and see how it runs for you side by side with 2017.
Yeah, absolutely. 2019, there was across the board, pretty much all the teams there, we had a bunch of emphasis on performance. And so, I mean, and that's like, it's a moving target, right? You know, we don't go,
never good enough.
Success, we're done.
Never good enough.
It's basically once it's better, then people say, oh, this is now the new thing. Now it's not good enough because this other thing needs to be better. And like we feel that internally as well. And so, but I don't know. I like working on performance in general. So it's kind of fun to talk about. So anyways, this is a more fleshed out example of anonymous record types anyways. They're just sort of like ad hoc collections of data. So similar to tuples, except they're more like name tuples, but they also are default comparable, default equatable, that sort of stuff, because we generate all of that under the covers with record types. So they are the equivalent of F# records, except you don't have to declare them up front, what their types are. You can just start declaring them in line. And that can be really useful in a number of very small scenarios. And so in aggregate, those number of scenarios makes it a useful feature. But you know, it's not like, you know, this thing that's going to totally change your life so much. It's just going to make things a little bit nicer.
Is this the one?
Yeah, that's the one. So that's sort of what the syntax looks like. So normal records, when you have an instance of them, they don't have the little bars in between the little brackets. But in this case, we have bracket bar as the designator in source code.
Bracket bar.
Yes. So another thing is there's F# is going to continue versioning, and we're also thinking.
You said that word again.
Yeah, I know. And we're going to be thinking about .NET Core 3.0, and we're thinking that the version of F# that's going to go with that is going to be F# 5.0. It's going to be more of a quality call. I talk about it in this blog post. Whether or not we go with another minor update, whether or not we go with F# 5, you know, which features go in, which features don't go in. It's all a quality call. We're not interested in rushing certain features in just to meet a deadline, because languages have to be stable. So if something's not good enough, we're going to cut it. But that being said, we do have about 8 features that are on deck so far, most of which are not related to other .NET stuff. But one of the big ones is nullable reference types. And so we have a version of that running. We ran it against our own compiler, and we found 15 places where we weren't doing an appropriate null handle. So that was interesting.
Yeah.
How
was it for stuff that wasn't actually like problems but were warnings? Did you have a lot of warnings that were spurious that you that you didn't respond to, or did you just like have 15 warnings and that was it?
We had 15 null reference exception
and 15
sort of waiting for us.
And you only had 15 warnings, or did you have a bunch of other warnings? Great. Okay.
Yeah, only 15.
Okay, so you didn't get a lot of spurious warnings. The way you had written your code was such that there wasn't a lot of stuff that you were going to ignore. And so the null reference work, the C# work went really well. You ran F# nullable references or C# against that? So the F# stuff ran on itself, and you didn't. Okay, cool, great. Okay,
yeah, so
it's very exciting.
We found basically 15 bugs. I mean, we don't know for sure if those paths had ever been hit, but they're sort of like latent bugs. In a way, like, you know, who knows, some little thingy that somebody does triggers one of those things, causes an exception, and the compiler paints their editor red. They have to close and open the file. They don't know what caused that. They get freaked out or something like that. And we may have never even heard from those people, but just the fact that we know that we can squash those makes us feel pretty good.
That's pretty awesome. That's pretty awesome. So it's quite unusual that this long has gone on and we haven't heard much from Emo. I do have one small thing I need to hit at the end, but we have hardly heard from you.
Well,
we've hardly heard from you.
Emo talks way too much.
I know. But that's what I'm saying. It's so surprising. You know, that never happens. I guess we're tag teaming.
Yeah,
that must
Kathleen, I mean, individually we may not be able to overpower him, but together with our forces combined.
And that's because Emo is totally and completely awesome, as is Philip.
I'm hiding. Also, the one thing I would like to point out. My co-presenter today has amazing hair. You should really comment on that because he tried really hard. Anyway, so let me just go back to.
That's an in joke.
That is a very much.
It is an in joke.
But if you do watch the first stream, I had really awful hair, and I noticed, and I put a beanie on.
So talking about language features, so let's stay in this vicinity for a moment. So we announced this index and range feature in C#, and if you haven't seen it, it's effectively a way. Do I have a sample somewhere here? Yes, there is. So basically, there's a way you can say head1, which basically means basically the same thing as this, right? List count -1, right? The problem that we have is that the way the language works is that when you have expressions like, you know, head int or, you know, in ... another int, they have to bind to particular types. And so index type is basically the type that can denote indexing from the beginning or indexing from the end, and range is basically two indices combined. And so we had to effectively, in order to support those types in the framework, we were now tasked with basically adding a bunch of indexers that take index, a bunch of indexers that take range. And that is actually a lot of work for us to do. Also, there are some cases that we just can't add them. So for example, if you take all of the collection interfaces that we have, we don't really have a way to add a method to an interface. I mean, we now have default implementations of interfaces, but they're not fully baked yet. They're not supported by all languages yet. So we don't see this as a good way to do that. So basically what this proposal here is, it's in the C# Lang org. It was accepted, and basically the idea is, how about the compiler takes care of that? Because if you have an expression like this here where you say head1, the compiler can do the lifting and just rewrite this to this, right? And in the same way that the compiler can do this with range support as well, if you say, where's the example here? Yeah, if you say, you know, you call the get method and then it returns your collection and you say, you know, ... 1. Then the compiler can basically rewrite that in some smart way. I think there was a sample somewhere in here. Maybe not. But basically the idea is that the compiler will take care of a good chunk of those things, and we will rewrite them so that we don't have to add a bunch of stuff to the BCL. And there's actually an issue that I filed which basically highlights what we will do. We basically remove a bunch of functionality that we added in, I don't know, preview 3 maybe, and make it easier for the compiler to actually, or basically use the compiler to make it our life easier to do these, which also makes it somewhat more, you know, viable to use these with interfaces, and we think that's all a good thing. So if you're interested in language design, if you're interested in library design and how they interact, I highly recommend reading this fantastic document written by Jared. So it tells you a little bit about how the compiler actually works under the covers and how the framework types and the compiler interact in some meaningful fashion. That's a cool feature. Can I comment on how that's going to come out in VB? Absolutely not. Of course you can. So it turns out that the way that the BCL put together the index and range, they have factory methods which are very readable, like
the indexed from end, like index.from end. And so they're very, very readable. And so the current plan is that Visual Basic will use those factory methods at least to the point where we cover some other issues that we think are bigger. And because we think it's actually very VB-like, that those names. And so we think that that's awesome. And then the work that you're doing on effectively having more places where an integer works and you don't need an index, that will also just it'll just flow through the other languages with no problem. So it's a kind of a cool place where the BCL and all the languages just kind of worked without a lot of friction. Sometimes it's a little harder. There's a few features that we've all worked harder to make. No reference types come to mind. Where we've all had to work harder, maybe defaults interface methods. Well, we've just had to work harder. But this was one where it just naturally all came together, which was very cool.
Yeah, I'm actually pretty happy with the feature, all in all. So the other thing I want to talk about is obsolescence. So if you have paid attention to .NET, then you probably noticed that we have not just amazing things. We also have some things that are somewhat questionable, right? And that's just normal for any framework that exists for a while. How do I zoom into this and actually make that somewhat readable?
Yeah. And I made him look that word up. It is. I wanted it to be obsolescence, and that is actually a word.
Obsolescence is actually a word, it turns out.
So yeah.
So basically the idea is this, right? So today, so the problem that we have effectively in the framework is every time we obsolete something, somebody gets a warning, right? That's kind of the idea of the feature fundamentally, right? The problem is if we obsolete technologies, then it's not just a single API we have to obsolete, right? If you think, for example, non-generic collections is like 12 types or something like this, right? So that means we will have to obsolete 12 types. If you use 12 types throughout your code base, that can easily result in hundreds of warnings in your code base, right? Now you combine this with all the other things you would like to obsolete, some networking APIs, some reflection APIs, whatever it is, right? Then upgrading from one framework version to the other now results in, let's say, 500 warnings, right?
Yeah, and if I just tell them all to be quiet, and there's 100 of those that I really plan on fixing right now, and 400 that I really need to delay until the next version, not of, we try to not be too obsolete in the code that we're giving to people. I want to clarify that when I say us here, I just mean somebody who's out there working. They can't do it in pieces very well right now. They can't say this technology, take it out.
No, basically the issue is you can either disable obsolescence entirely because there's one warning ID for all obsolescence.
Today.
Yeah, so basically I think it's CS 0618 if I remember correctly. And so you suppress this one, and then no obsolescence warnings will appear. Or you can use pragmas to suppress each individual occurrence, which of course does not scale either, right? So what you really want to say is like, well, I have a project that integrates with non-generic collections. That's great. I would just ignore all obsolescence regarding non-generic collections. And then the ones where we recommend to use HTTP client, for example, over web request, this one you will still get, and then you can fix your code.
And isn't it even worse because in order to get it right, if I want to say no more non-generic collections that I'm ready to get rid of, I have to know what all of those are, and I have to look at everything and go, is that in that category or is it in some other category? And so it's actually pretty nasty to work with the current situation, which is why you're looking at a variation of it going forward.
So the fundamental idea is, like, if you look at the obsolete attribute today it's pretty simple, right? It has a message and you can say whether you want it to be an error or not, and that's it. And so what I plan on doing is I try to push them to say, well, imagine you get a diagnostic ID. So you can basically say, if this obsolescence occurs, give this diagnostic ID. So if you look at how we would use this in the framework, we would say, well, array list and hash table, we would both attribute with, this is the ID for non-generic collections, and then secure string, which is another one, would get a different ID. And then you can say, I really don't care about non-generic collections, you suppress them, and then 250 warnings disappear, and then 10 remain, and it's like secure string. You're like, okay, great. Let me fix this one. So this way you can tailor it to your existing code bases more easily. You may have to add 10, 12 different warning IDs to your project file, but that's still better than to get hundreds of warnings and suppress them all individually. And so the idea is that with this we have a much easier time of actually telling you when things are obsoleted. The other thing I would like to do is add a URL, because today the other problem is you get this one-liner, and the one-liner is usually not enough, right? So for example, non-generic collections, it's really more of a, well, this collection kind of maps to this collection, but here are some caveats you have to keep in mind. So for example, hash table will give you null when the key doesn't exist. Dictionary will throw a key not found exception. So you kind of have to change your code a little bit, and that you can't really express this meaningfully in a one-liner. So really we want to be able to say, well, there should be URL behind that obsolete category. And then the idea is usually that takes you to one page where it's nicely written up. And in Visual Studio, when you actually look at the error list and you see the ID, it should become a link. So when you click on that, it directly takes you to the documentation page that explains to you what that obsolete is all about. And so this way, I think people have an easier time understanding what we obsoleted, why we obsoleted it, and what it means to your code base. And if you say, yeah, I don't care, it's a single entry to get rid of a whole class of things.
So is that going to be something that people that have libraries outside Microsoft are going to be, is it designed to be used outside Microsoft, or is this just a Microsoft feature?
No, this is, I mean, the attribute will be public. I mean, the downside with the attribute is, of course, because it's part of the platform, in order for you to use it, you have to upgrade to the new version. So if you're building a .NET Standard 2.0 library today, you can't use it even after we ship this unless you're willing to migrate to whatever new version of .NET Standard has this attribute shape, right? So that's the downside, but you know, as with anything we do in the platform, it will take a while until it gets mainstream adoption and people can use it everywhere. But yeah, this thing is not tied to us. Anybody can do that.
Right, great, okay.
The other thing that we plan on doing is we have shipped this before, which is, it's a PR right now that's in draft mode because I'm not ready yet to actually review it, but you can actually get a glimpse on what this thing is about. And like in short, like there was this actually really nice screenshot which kind of summarizes this in a nice way. There's this tool that we shipped called Platform Compat, and basically the idea is if you use an API that is platform specific, then it would be nice if it would tell you upfront that it's platform specific, so you don't have to actually run the code on the platforms where it will blow up
and hit those code paths and all that. Yeah.
The downside with this tool is like this is a tool that you can install today. It works pretty well, but the tool today is basically a tool that carries a database with all the framework APIs that we know don't work everywhere. So it doesn't really scale for third parties, right? So the first thing I want to do is I want to make sure that we basically have a mechanism for anybody to annotate their own APIs with saying this one is platform specific. And then the second problem is, well, the tool doesn't really help you a lot with writing platform, you know, cross-platform code, because it just tells you where the errors occur, but then suppressions become kind of hard to deal with. Because usually what you want to do is you want to say, yes, I want to wrap a platform-specific API. So a good example here is this case here. You have an existing code path where you say, well, I extract something from the registry, but if the registry can't be used because I'm not on Windows, then, well, all I have to do is I just wrap this code in this platform guard and then say, yep, I only run this code when I'm on Windows. And if I'm not on Windows, or if the registry key doesn't exist, I just fall back to some default value, right? So this is historically known as light up code, where you just provide additional functionality on a particular operating system. And in this example here, you really don't want to get a warning because you already wrote your code in the correct way. And the other analyzer wasn't smart enough to realize this. So the idea is that this will just work fine. And then the other idea is if you're like somebody who exposes platform-specific APIs, what you would do is you would offer your API, and then you would just annotate your API with saying, yo, this API is platform-specific. And so now anybody who calls your API equally gets a warning that this will only work on Linux because that's what the API said. And then this way it composes much more nicely. And the analyzer also helps you with putting those attributes in a consistent fashion toward your code base, similar to how nullable reference types work, where the compiler enforces that you're consistent with what you promise and what you're actually doing in the code base.
So this works a little bit earlier in process, isn't it? Or is it already fleshed out pretty well?
This is all like still, like as I said, like the whole PR is in draft mode. I will probably finish the PR over the next days. I will tweet about it, and I'm looking forward to get feedback. But the general concept of platform-specific warnings or an analyzer for that, we basically have done like a 1.5 years ago. We have shipped it. Many people are using it, and we have received a lot of feedback from that. So I think the idea is pretty much validated that it's useful. But you know, as it is, we got some feedback on things that don't work very well, and this proposal is basically meant to address those and make it part of the platform rather than some random add-on that you have to install.
That sounds good. So we've got a comment that we need to look at comments on YouTube.
Yes,
so can we do that? And actually, while you look at that and see what's over there, I'd like, oh, actually, I have to wait to get back because I want you to display something. I'm not actually plugged in here unless, Philip, do you want to bring something up for me?
Oops, what time?
What do you need brought up?
GitHub, Dotnet, announcements, issue number 107.
So one question was basically
well, let's
yeah. Sorry, so if we just go over the YouTube questions first, maybe. So the thing is, basically what we do is we said we will remove patch versions by default in Visual Studio with .NET Core, right? And I think the question was, well, just because they show up so many things, is this really the right fix? And I think the idea was that, well, Visual Studio will remove the patches by default because you really don't want to be on latest, but I think you can still install the patches side by side if you really have to, right?
Yeah, so here's a couple of things on that. So first of all, Visual Studio itself takes care of what Visual Studio needs. So Visual Studio is actually even a little more aggressive as you update within a particular channel. So within either preview or release and 2017 and 2019. So that would be 4 channels, preview, release, 2017, 2019. Within the channel, Visual Studio is doing a better job of taking care of itself. If you're installing on Windows through the SDK installer, you get the behavior that I talked about. If you're installing via the zips and tarballs and all that stuff, you're taking care of this yourself. We're not expecting to be cleaning up after you. We're expecting that you want that control. So it's absolutely intended that you can do that. It's just that we're being a little bit more helpful for the many cases where people are just winding up with boatloads on their machine. Some of whom work for Microsoft and take a lot of previews, but even if you're not working for Microsoft, if you take every patch, you're going to have a lot of .NET Core SDKs on your machine. Was there another question?
Yeah, there's a few more. So the other question was, the new project system is supported for .NET Framework projects in the sense that you can put the TFM in there that targets full framework. And so they're saying, if you're using it today on .NET Framework, you're saying it's not supported. Well, the thing here is it's a bit more nuanced, right? I mean, yes, you can use the SDK style projects to target full framework. However, if you have a random .NET Framework project, that may use features and tooling that the SDK style projects do not support. So a good example would be click once, let's say, or add service reference, or some of the other things. Sorry, what? Flavoring. That's it. Yeah, flavoring is more like a almost implementation tool for us. But yeah, like there's a bunch of stuff that we can't replicate. So that's why we're saying you can't just take a random .NET Framework project today, move this to SDK style and expect that to work. But if you're building a class library, then yeah, you probably get away with that.
Also, for the vast majority of .NET Framework projects are not using SDK style.
Right.
Yeah. So like this is not applicable for like the vast majority of projects that are out there.
And so just to clarify that, there's the original project system and there's the SDK project system. And this work that you showed about 2019 is SDK only.
Yep.
So we talked about it as full framework, and we were not very precise when we did that because, in fact, it's the SDK style versus the original format as opposed to actually it being full framework. So whoever said that, thank you very much. That comment was helped us to be more precise. So thanks a lot on that.
Yeah, another question is this coming to Xamarin? Do you know?
No idea.
Yeah, neither do I.
Xamarin has a stand-up, and there's if you send it to us, we'll forward it to the right people. But you know, there's an answer to that. We just don't know it.
Yep.
Excuse me.
So the other question was, how's the JSON stuff coming? Yeah, we talked about the JSON stuff a lot in the past. I will.
Project.json?
No, not project.json. The JSON APIs, I'm pretty sure is the question here. So like custom type resolution, above polymorphism and CLS types and all of that. Yeah, we will talk a little bit more about this. Right now we're heavily working on this, so this thing is changing faster than I can speak, and I can speak pretty fast. So that's not necessarily helpful. So I will cover that in a later episode. The other question was, will obsolescence offer suggestions for replacements? No, because in the general case, obsolescence are not done when there's literally a drop-in replacement. Because if there would be a drop-in replacement, well, what would the obsolescence be about? The shape of the API, the name? Neither of them are really good reasons to obsolete something. Usually you obsolete something when the fundamental design is bogus or has shifted, right? Think non-generic collections and generic collections, right? Like there isn't really a one-to-one replacement, right? There is a suggestion to replace, let's say, hash table with dictionary, but we can't really code fix this because, well, you have to change the code that you use to get values out, for example, right? So I fundamentally believe that there has to be a doc page that you have to read and understand. Like, I don't think we can tool that. And then, take secure string. The replacement here is don't use it. So how would you even tool that? Like the replacement there is don't have passwords, use other means of authentication that don't require you to pass around passwords. So again, like your code fixes re-engineer your application, right? It's not like, oh yeah, change this one line with this one line. So I think that's all we had.
We have questions, but I've got something. Philip's got something that I want to take a look at.
I'm gonna switch over.
And you are apparently in duplicate mode. Non-duplicate mode, you're apparently.
Or if, Mimo, you can bring it up real quick if that's going to work better.
All right, you go ahead and do that.
All right, so it's announcements.
It's announcements.
So GitHub. So that's GitHub.net announcements. And we actually have thought through the right way for each repo to behave. And for this repo, it works off of issues. So you'll have to look at issues, and then it's number 107, where we do PRs on the designs repo, and we think we kind of have the probably the right answer for each one. So what's happening here is that what I want to get out is that if you produce a .NET tool CLI reference, a tool that uses goes into the project file and has .NET CLI tool reference. Got it right the second time. If you are producing one of those, you need to be aware that you will need to continue to target 2.2. We've tried to make this 2.2 or below. We've tried to make this as smooth a transition as possible, but we are transitioning to the new .NET SDK tooling system, the .NET CLI tooling system with local and global tools. And local tools are now introduced, and we really want to hear where they're not a full replacement for .NET CLI tool reference. But the reason that we did a new design is that .NET CLI tool reference really, it has a really serious flaw in its design. And because of that, we created the new system from scratch, and now we need to start turning the old system off. And it will continue to have all the problems it has today, which I can discuss in way more detail, but you put up with versions, so I'm not doing that to you. We're going to hold that at 2.2, so we will not make the situation worse by going across the major version boundary and various other things that contribute to making it worse. So if you go to .NET Core 3.0 and you use a package that is a .NET CLI tool reference for at least the 3.0 timeframe, you should work fine. The only thing is that the producer of that package does need to target 2.2 or below, or it just won't work. And I don't know how much help we will be able to give authors because they don't all use .NET Pack to create those tools. So since we don't know how it's created, we're not sure we're even going to spend the cycles to give warnings to the authors. But the authors need to know this, and as soon as they try to run it, then it will fail if it targets .NET 3.0. So all your tools should still keep working. If you're an author and are not making any changes to your tool, everything should be fine. But if you are planning for a future for your tool, please be aware that that future for a .NET CLI tool reference should not include .NET Core 3. If that's a problem for you, you should definitely reach out to me. We had a few internally that were actually kind of gnarly, and we were able to work with people to get a good solution for them. So if this is a problem for you, you can reach out to me personally, and I'll get you connected with the right people. So that's like, I think I got to talk about like everything I wanted to today.
All the fun stuff.
My list. Well, next time I've got one we'll talk about next time, but I can mention it, which is that we are, and we've talked about, we're looking at changes to global.json, and that the big focus there is a way you can specify preview. So if you've been wanting to specify preview in your global.json, we're working on that. We're working on some other possible changes as well. And if you watch .NET Designs, I expect we'll have a draft design, which all of the designs on .NET Designs you should expect may change. But I hope that's going to be up today or tomorrow. So you can watch for that.
That sounds good. Mm-hmm. I think we have, at least as far as I can see, the chat client does not seem to work very well. So I just looked up at...
so it's waiting for new messages.
Yeah. Do we have any questions
so
on either
at YouTube? The question was, do we have observables more pervasively through the BCL? We have no plans on doing that. We just added iasync enumerable, and we are thinking about adding links.extension methods to iasync enumerable, but there's no plans to do this for iObservable. Yeah, neither for language support. Somebody's asking, why does Immo sound like he's on a nice speakerphone while Kathleen sounds like she's in the studio? I don't know. Maybe I'm really bad at using my mic. That would be my explanation.
Yep. Or Kathleen is just more professional than the both of us.
That's probably
Kathleen
true.
might have been in front of a mic a little more. So we'll work on that for next time. We'll try to have all of us. We have great mics here, so we'll try to be a little bit. I'm having to lean over because I didn't align my mic very well, and so I will work on that. You brought up. Oh, you were talking about observables. I think if folks have things that iObservable does that you do not think that the iSync enumerable is going to do, you should make sure it's in our radar and let us know. You can reach out to me and I'll pass it on. It's not an area of my high expertise, but I can certainly pass it on, or you can reach out on C# Lang. C# Lang is always a good place for all things C# that are deep design on new things, and Rosalind for bugs. So right. Yeah,
sounds good. I think we are over time now.
We are over time. We're like almost 10 minutes over. I think we should look at a wrap on this.
We should. Let me just quickly grab my keyboard again so that I don't mess it up again.
I could just end the stream with the two buttons.
Well, let's see if we can't go out a little more gracefully than that.
Okay.
So I think the way we are supposed to do this is by pressing the right button, but I want to bring up the monitor so I actually know whether it works or not.
You have to watch us as we're just working on saying goodbye here. So we should say goodbye first. And
so
then
let's hold our hands. Let's
are we singing Kumbaya?
No, we say goodbye, and we really hope you enjoyed it. Hopefully next time you're a bit more organized.
Absolutely.
See you guys next time.
Bye. We're not doing a prayer.